Hello, and welcome to the Talking Precision Medicine podcast. In this series, we sit down with experts on the application of AI and big data analytics in the drug discovery space. Our guests are innovators, business decision makers, and thought leaders at the intersection of data and therapeutics. We discuss the promise, practice, challenges, and myths of AI in precision medicine. This show is brought to you by Genialis, and Rafael, our CEO, is your host. Genialis is focused on data integration and predictive modeling of disease biology to help accelerate the discovery and de-risk the development of novel therapeutics. Today, our guest is Tina Larson. Tina is COO of Recursion Pharmaceuticals, where she is tasked with building the team, the operations, and the culture to tackle Recursion's audacious goals. Tina has over 20 years of experience in the biopharmaceutical industry and was recently awarded the 2019 Distinguished Alumni Award from her alma mater, Colorado State University. In this episode, we talk about the language of multidisciplinary teams, recruiting top talent while fostering inclusivity, and the promise of melding tech and biology to advance treatments at unprecedented scale. Let's dive in.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Today, our guest on Talking Precision Medicine is Tina Larson. Tina is the Chief Operating Officer of Recursion Pharmaceuticals. And in case you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard of Recursion Pharmaceuticals. They certainly have one of the most prominent voices in the world of data-driven discovery and pharmaceuticals. But Tina, why don't you tell us, in your own words, about Recursion? What's its mission? What are you guys doing, and what makes you different?
Yeah, thanks, Rafael, and really a pleasure to be on the podcast today. So the mission of Recursion is decoding biology to radically improve lives, which is a pretty high-level mission statement, so I'll break that down really into its two parts. And so the second part of that is radically improving lives, and the way that we're doing that is by discovering new medicines. We are in this realm of, this emerging realm of artificial intelligence for drug discovery companies, and so really the core purpose of what we're here to do is to find new medicines for patients that need them. The first part of that is the decoding biology really speaks to the novelty of our technique and taking advantage of where this just really unique point in time at the intersection of laboratory automation, modern biological techniques, and things like machine learning and computational power, and really bringing all of these very rapidly evolving new technologies to bear at creating this huge data set of biology. And that data set really in its simplest forms is that we are taking human cells, and those cells we're figuring out ways that they can model diseases that we would want to treat. And then we take pictures of those cells, and our pictures can look at a cell, and we train machines to say, like, this is a healthy cell, and that's what it looks like, and this is a disease cell, and that's what it looks like. And sometimes even as humans, we cannot distinguish the difference between those two things, but machines and learning algorithms can. And so we use that data set to then ask lots of questions, thousands of questions a week about how can we treat human disease by finding new medicines.
That does sound like a very lofty and laudable goal. So just to say that back to you, so what makes Recursion special is you guys operate at kind of this intersection of really high throughput biology. So you mentioned automation and using modern techniques. Am I correct? Your kind of core lab technique is kind of cell painting of genetically modified cell lines, disease models, and of course the AI machine learning component. That's a lot. Is there a chicken and the egg? Does one of this come first, or are you guys executing on all three fronts at once?
Yeah, we have to execute on all those fronts at once, which is one of the reasons that Recursion is such an incredible place to work, and a reason that I am really excited to be here. It also makes it really hard to build this organization. And I think something that I've been watching for many years, I've been in the biotechnology industry for over 20 years. I was there and watched the growth of and participated in figuring out how to use recombinant DNA technology to produce new therapies called biologics, which are not new anymore. They're kind of old now, but that was very much what I did as an engineer early in my career. And so I think what's so interesting to be here now is that we're like at this point in time where there's a new convergence of technology that's allowing us to kind of take that next step in drug discovery and development. So I'm really excited to be here, but we do spend a lot of time as an organization thinking about how do we bring all of these disciplines together. And I'm happy to kind of deep dive into more of all the ways that we think about that, but that is really core to our success of a company, of how do we get a data scientist and a biologist and a chemist and an automation engineer all thinking about how are we going to generate a data set that can then be used to discover medicines.
Yeah, let's dissect this a bit, and we can either work forwards or backwards. I like that the kind of the end product is this data set that then you sort of build the actual discoveries off of. But how do you think then about companies' organization structure? So you've got these very different disciplines. Are they siloed within the organization? How do you actually set up your company so that they can crosstalk?
Yeah, we try very, very hard to break down silos. We think about this a lot. We do have teams that sit together. So we have, our data scientists tend to sit together. Our software engineers tend to sit together. There's some, we talk a lot about whether we would mix that up and what the different ways of doing that are from just kind of a physical space. But the reality is we are multidisciplinary. Like that is what is absolutely key to solving problems in this way, is that we need to get our biologists and chemists and data scientists and software engineers all thinking about problems in the same way. And so there's a lot of ways that shows up in the organization. One that has been a huge learning for me, coming from a more singular industry in the biotech industry, where you kind of develop a language, like if I was working at Genentech and I went to a conference and talked to somebody from Amgen or Biogen, you very comfortably slip into this language that people in the biotechnology use to discuss what's happening. Coming here for the first time in my life, working at a tech company, and really a tech meets biotech company, the biotech language isn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of people here from big pharma. The big pharma language isn't enough. We have people here from tech companies that have never worked in healthcare before, right? And so the tech language isn't enough. And so we've almost had to create in some ways our own language, and that feeds directly into the culture that we create of how do we enable these multidisciplinary teams to function really effectively.
That's fantastic. And how old is Recursion? You guys have grown fast, but this has been a learning process for sure, no?
Yeah, we're 6 years old, so still very young, but we've had a lot of organizational learning in those 6 years.
So as head of operations, it's probably going to fall at least somewhat under your watch. Then you have to now recruit for lots of different disciplines. You have to think about resource prioritization. What is the thought process, and kind of at what levels of the team are those decisions made?
Yeah, so I think one thing that we did is, because of how important culture is to us and these multidisciplinary teams, we invested in a chief people officer pretty early on. So we started recruiting for that late last year. I had the kind of luxury of being able to talk to some great chief people officers across the industry to really learn, what this could look like, and ended in bringing in Heather Kirkby, who's now our chief people officer, who comes from an incredibly strong background in both tech. She's an engineer, a product manager, and then transitioned over to HR and people things at Intuit. And so that's one example of just investing in, a senior executive, a C-suite executive that's very experienced, that very intentional about things like culture and recruiting. We have a very elegant and incredibly talented talent acquisition team here to help us bring all of the people here. Not only do we have the challenge of bringing people from across all these disciplines, which is hard enough, but we are not located in a major hub. I moved from San Francisco to Salt Lake City to join Recursion, and Salt Lake City has an amazing very rapidly growing tech scene in particular, a very strong life science scene. But we're not San Francisco, we're not Boston, and so we really have to go out into those markets and work hard to make sure people know about us and kind of get them excited about coming here.
Maybe an unpopular opinion, but I would argue that's a strength more than a liability to be in Salt Lake and the Silicon Slopes. I mean, can't beat it for the cost of the access to the outdoors. So
it has become. I learned to see it as a strength. I mean, I will be honest. When I first talked, and the company was in Salt Lake City after 22 years working in the Bay Area. Even though I'm not from there, but my whole career was there. It wasn't obvious what the advantage was to me at first, but now that I'm here, not only is it an incredible place to live, people can afford to live here, particularly people early in their career, which we really need. But also we're a little bit outside of what can be a little bit of an echo chamber sometimes in these major markets. And so we've been able to bring people from all over the place together to kind of form something new, which is really fun.
And Recursion is in Salt Lake because Chris Gibson, your co-founder and CEO, did his PhD there. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I would say even more than Chris doing his PhD work here, his partner, she's an amazing medical doctor, leader, and her career is here. And, and I think speaks a lot to the fact that Chris is doing the hard work of growing a company here in Salt Lake City and in support of his partner's career.
It makes a lot of sense, and it frankly is consistent with what I glean as part of the culture at Recursion, really kind of focusing on life balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that commitment starts at the top. Leaders have a huge impact on how organizations think and behave. And that was a big selling point, honestly, for me coming to work for Chris. And we could dive deeper into some of the things, the ways we think about things like diversity and inclusion. But, as a female leader, coming to a tech company, moving my whole family, it was really important to me to work for a leader that could appreciate and value what that experience might be like.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, the tech industry probably has earned a lot of its black eyes about inclusivity and diversity, and certainly there are organizations that are looking to make changes there. I think life sciences is probably, at least in terms of gender inclusion, a bit better than tech, but still not uncommon to go to a conference and see a panel of a bunch of dudes up there. So how does Recursion think about this? Is it deliberate, or do you just kind of have this inclusivity baked into the way you do business?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the answer is it's both. I think the baked in part, kind of as I mentioned, is that the caring about it starts at the top, right? If your CEO, if your executive team doesn't truly care, no matter what initiatives you roll out or what goals you set, the rest of the company's not going to care. Like, people know. People are really smart, and they pick up on what's truly important to the leaders of the company. And so that's where it starts. Having said that, we have, intentionally translated that to make sure that message and that caring is really visible in several ways. One way is, we try to be very kind of visible and about it on social media. And just in a way, we don't really actually have a formal plan around that necessarily, right. But when we're out, on our social media networks, I think being comfortable taking a stand, in terms of like why this is important, how it's important, when people are doing it well, like supporting them and kind of highlighting that. And so that's something that I think we all have the freedom and actually enjoy doing at the company, just to show that visible commitment to diversity and inclusion, which is good for everybody. More specifically, we did for our 2019 goals, we identified that in order to improve the diversity of candidates that was kind of in the pipeline of people that we were interviewing for positions, we really felt that we needed a pretty clear company goal to kind of remind ourselves and our hiring managers that we just need to put in a little bit of extra work to make sure that we're going out and really filling our pipelines with the best candidates. And those best candidates may not live in this state, they may not be in the social circles, of people, at the company. And so we really need to go out and work to do that. And so we set a very specific goal to have a very high percentage of our positions include at least one qualified candidate that's from a historically underrepresented group. And we left that a little bit vague because these things are hard to measure and you have to be really careful about how you measure them. And there's we always hire the best candidate. That's a very clear kind of standard for us, but we have seen kind of reminding ourselves that we have to do that extra work to diversify our talent pool. We've seen a much broader diversity kind of in the pipeline of candidates coming in, and it has resulted, for example, in the number of women at the company has increased from 20-something% to about 40%, in the last year. So I think these are things that if you do have the right attitude and behaviors and beliefs coming from leadership, and then you put some very specific goals behind them, you can make a lot of progress in a pretty short amount of time.
I think you guys have set up a great model, and you mentioned you've got this social media cadence. If to our listeners, if you don't follow Recursion and its various mouthpieces on social media, you should. It's a lot of fun, and they do a great job on the marketing side. But so Tina, you are a top executive now at what's one of the most visible and promising young biopharma in the country and the world. How'd you get here? Tell us a bit about your story and where have you spent your career so far?
Feels like a lot of pressure when you put it that way, but
no
but
pressure. Hey, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Woo. So I think my career. So I come from a background in biochemical engineering. I have a degree in chemical engineering, and I started at Genentech in 1996, which was quite a few years ago. And at that time, we were right on the cusp of when things like antibodies to treat cancer, these recombinant human antibodies, were just about to be coming to patients, right? And at the time, as as a young engineer, I came into this situation where we had this incredible potential medicine to give to patients, in this case, women dying of breast cancer. It'd been through the clinical trials. The data showed the potential of the drug, but we actually couldn't manufacture enough of it fast enough because we hadn't really learned we didn't have the technology to learn how to scale this up to get this drug out to the thousands of patients that needed it. But that was like my first kind of day and first lesson coming into the industry. And it just like started what's been over 20 years for me of how can we use technology? How can scientists, engineers come together and figure out all the ways that we can improve medicines that are going out for these like really serious unmet medical conditions. So I spent about 2 decades of my life at the company Genentech, which was then bought by Roche. Then I went to a small company and we launched a novel antibiotic in the space of antibiotic resistance. And right as I was right in the middle of that launch, that commercial launch of the antibiotic, Recursion reached out and started a conversation with me. And so I was immediately excited about the company. I've been looking for years about like who is the company that is going to truly be able to apply technology to change the way that things are done. And I think that's very hard to do. And so I saw Recursion's approach and was really excited immediately. It did take Chris many months and many conversations and kind of a pleasant relentlessness to convince me that it was worth moving my family to Utah.
Good on him. He seems to be a true believer. So
yes, absolutely. That helps a lot. He's very compelling.
And so, you've come in with a lot of experience under your belt at Genentech, obviously, which is a famously great company to work for. I hope you had a similar experience.
Absolutely.
But surely growing startup is unlike anything else. So how have you grown into this role, especially as Recursion has grown as a company? And where would you say the company is in its growth plans today?
Yeah, so I think I was lucky in that the last company before Recursion, we grew from about 60 to over 200 people. And so I saw just that phase of growth of a company, which has a lot of interesting and unique challenges. And that experience really helped me, being on the executive team of that company and just kind of seeing how you grow a company of that size was really helpful experience. And one of the things that I was able to bring here to Recursion was being able, when I got here, we were probably about 90 people. We're roughly 160 people today and continue to grow. And so I had a little bit of a sense of, I kind of know what's coming. I'd already experienced what that phase of growth looks like, where a lot of people here hadn't been through that before. So I think that was something that I was immediately able to contribute to the company, which felt good because I had so much learning to do in so many other areas. I mean, just understanding the technology, I had to really approach my job with a lot of humility and just realizing that there's just a lot of things about machine learning and cloud computing and other things that I really was not grounded in. And that did feel really uncomfortable. And so I kind of I described to people, my experience here, even after a year, is almost like studying for finals every day, right? Just because there's so much to learn and so many wonderful people here to learn from. I think something else that I've had to grow into this role is just appreciating that the models, all these years of experience, some of it is really relevant in terms of, what people care about, how you lead people, how you grow a company. But some of it, Recursion is really unique. A tech-first biotech is a new breed of company. And sometimes experience helps a lot. And sometimes it's just realizing that my experience is actually not relevant in this situation. And I need to be, I've had to learn a lot to slow down, make sure that I really understand what we're talking about, ask a lot of questions, even when I feel like I probably, sometimes as an executive, you feel like you shouldn't be the smartest one in the room. I'm never the smartest one in the room here, and that's okay. And really just kind of having that, like learning to, while we're moving at an incredible pace here and things are going so fast, like learning how to like sometimes slow down and make sure that we all really understand and are really, asking good questions.
Yeah, I think the humility in the startup world is especially important, and maybe in the life sciences world as well. There's just so much we don't know and shouldn't pretend that we do. If you had to put your finger on one challenge that came as a surprise, something that you either didn't realize you'd have to think about or something you thought you knew and turns out you didn't, can you share something that surprised you how hard it was?
So I've had a lot of surprises, and I think one of the ones that resonates a lot is coming not only to a tech company, but a young company, and some of the big cultural differences between what's kind of maybe a more traditional biotech or pharma. And one that really stands out to me is how collaborative this community likes to be. Open sourcing information, open sourcing code, using open source code, giving away code. Like this is a concept generally, the kind of the training that I learned coming up in more of a biopharmaceutical context is there's certainly a level of sharing, but there's also quite a strong level of secrecy and competition in order to kind of protect your key value, and which is always a really difficult balance, right? To be both a good member of the scientific community and also make sure you're keeping the value for your company. I had thought that I'd come from environments where we actually were quite good at trying to kind of publish and be a part of the scientific community and collaborate where we could. But here I've learned that there's a whole new level of just really this sense of people being as, or even maybe even more dedicated in some cases to like the global community of learning than to the specific company they're working at. And so that's been a really interesting learning, and it's certainly challenged my thinking about how you run a business and kind of participate in this like larger collaboration of technology.
I think this is one of the most interesting and maybe underappreciated aspects of the blurring of lines between tech and life science. The tech community really does have, at least in a lot of circles, a tradition of sharing. I mean, even Google and Amazon and these giants open source a ton of their AI developments. And in the world of bioinformatics and biological data science, it's almost like the community isn't going to trust a black box, so you have to open it up, right? Whereas in life science, IP is everything. And we've had to drag big pharma kicking and screaming to create sort of pre-competitive data sets and things like that. But here you guys go and you open source the RxRx1 data set. Can you maybe tell the audience a bit about what is this data set, what went into the decision to make it public, and what's been the community response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the RxRx1, once again, this was a learning for me when I first heard that our team, was excited about releasing this data set to the public. My initial reaction was like, oh, that's our core, property. Why would we just put it out there to the whole world?
Yeah. So for listeners,
this
was, I guess, your first complete package data set of cellular images, and it was large. I'll have to dig out.
Yeah. Oh, no, so I can definitely walk you through it. So we made this decision to release the RxRx1 data set. We did that via a Kaggle competition, and that competition is going to be coming to an end soon, and we're going to announce the winners at NeurIPS in December. And that data set is about 300 gigabytes of data, which is more than 100,000 biological images. It's over 1,000 different genetic contexts that those images are representing, and it's over time. There were images captured over 51 weeks, so almost a year's worth of images, and kind of a similar number of different batches. And so the idea there was to give the community a sense of many different images of biology, different cell types, different contexts, a sizable data set at 300 gigabytes, 300 plus gigabytes, and then some of the noise and variation that can come over time, batch-to-batch variability, just to kind of give a sense of what we deal with every day. And so we made the decision to release that data set, and it's been an incredible response by the community, which has been fantastic to see. On the flip side, I think it's also important to know that it's a very, very small percentage of our total data set. So we have over 3 petabytes of this type of data and these images. We're producing about 70 or 80 terabytes a week of this type of data. And so this data set represents less than 1% of what we generate in a week of data. And so it seemed like a really good balance of kind of giving people access to a sense of what we do. And then also for us, an incredible opportunity for the community to come and compete in this competition and teach us things that we hadn't been able to do with our data, which is just really, just a wonderful thing about this kind of open sourcing and open collaboration.
It's really cool. And I'm excited to see the outcome of the Kaggle competition as well. I think it certainly seemed from the internets that you guys got a lot of different groups excited to throw their hat in the ring and see what they could learn from the data.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a particularly fantastic day when I read that Anthony Goldblum, the CEO of Kaggle, said that this was the first Kaggle competition he'd actually entered because he was so interested in seeing the biological images. So that was a pretty happy day here.
Very cool. So let me ask you some questions about your clinical work. So everything we've discussed thus far is more or less around the discovery part of drug development. How you figure out, as you said at the beginning, decoding biology and maybe finding the right targets or positioning compounds. What does Recursion have going on in the clinic, and what do you see as sort of the next year of milestones there?
Yeah, so we have 2 compounds at the clinical trial stage. One is currently in a phase 1 trial, and so phase 1 is the kind of the safety trials for the drugs, and that's a compound for cerebral cavernous malformation, which is a rare genetic disease. And I think it's just important to note that while we are applying a lot of cutting-edge technology to the drug discovery portion, when we, at this point at least, when we get into the human clinical trials, we're doing that the way per all of the FDA guidance, right? There's nothing, we're not using AI to change the way that clinical trials are done. I think there's a lot of interesting ways that could be done in the future, but I think that's important to note. And so those clinical trials will proceed in conjunction with the FDA as any other compounds and medicines in development. Our second compound is for neurofibromatosis 2. This is also a rare disease, once again, a genetically inherited rare disease. And that's a compound that we actually, when we discovered the hit on our platform, went out and found who in the world had the IP, and that IP was actually arrested in a university, and so we in-licensed that IP from the university, and it had already been in humans in a different indication, so there's already some human data available for that, and so now we're working on our plans to go to the health authorities to look at setting that up for a phase 2 trial. So that's where we are with those compounds, and I think that last story is particularly descriptive of what we do initially with our technologies. Now that we're building this large data set with all these biological images, and we can ask so many questions, and we're running right now about 300,000 to 400,000 experiments a week, and that grows all the time. The initial questions we're asking of our technology platform are, of the hundreds of thousands, millions of drugs sitting out there, shelved at pharmaceutical companies or elsewhere in the world, are any of those are all known to impact biology somehow. Is it possible to repurpose any of those into disease areas that have been somewhat neglected, like small population rare diseases? And so both of these compounds, these 2 clinical trials, these 2 compounds that are in clinical trials are both in that area of finding something that was already a chemical known to the world, but hadn't, and then repurposing it into a different context, into a different disease. So those are the first questions we've been asking our platform, and are really excited. I think increasingly now we're getting to ask a whole broader set of questions and a broader set of diseases of not only how do you repurpose drugs, but how do you design new drugs that target novel biology, which is the really exciting part about the growth and expansion of the platform.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think for those out there who are thinking about how to start a biotech or start a biopharma, if you have a way to do a repurposing platform, it makes a lot of sense, because your milestone is to get into the clinic as fast as you can. And if there's a safety profile for a compound out there and it works, all the better. You speed it up, you can get things in the hands of patients faster and hit your proof points. But it does seem, especially based on the recent papers by In Silico Medicine, and just today there was an announcement from Deep Genomics in Toronto that actually inventing new chemicals is going to be a really hot area for AI. And I'd love to see what Recursion has to contribute to that as your AI kind of expands into other parts of the R&D workflow.
I was just thinking about the In Silico and Deep Genomics papers. We were actually just talking about that internally, but maybe I won't comment on that. But I will comment on, looking about, you talk about like how do you build a biotech or a company, and I think one thing that we think a lot is like also how do you build a platform company, right? How do you build a platform company that's going to impact biotech? And I think I'm incredibly impressed by the team, certainly even before I got here, being very disciplined about, asking the most impactful yet simplest questions first to prove the technology, and then taking it to the next step. And I think beyond repurposing into rare disease being, certainly like a capital efficient, a timeline efficient way to get into the clinic, it's also really important to understand that was a really good place to make sure that we could validate the platform against something understood. A monogenic loss of function disease, we understand what causes that disease. And so we can really, kind of have some ground truth, if you will, in terms of validating what our platform's discovering. Now, as we move into areas like immunology, oncology, neuroscience, infectious disease, well, maybe infectious disease, we know what's causing infectious disease, but, some of these areas like immunology, for an example, we don't necessarily have so much clarity on what's causing the disease. And so I think it was important for us, not only just from a kind of an efficiency of using our money perspective and for like accessing patients that needed help and were being underserved perspective, but also to prove our technology platform can work in something where the context is a little better understood. And now that's given us the confidence to go into this world of creating new chemical entities against more complex diseases that are less well understood, and it won't feel like so much of a black box because we've already proven out the technology on a simpler question, if you will.
That makes a lot of sense. I think it's absolutely the right strategy. I was reading somewhere, it may have been in the news or on one of your bios, that you guys have actually done your first remote team acquisition. Tell me a bit about that. Who did you bring in and what are they doing, and how do you think about managing a remote team in addition to your headquarters?
Yeah, so the remote team is a vivarium, and so a vivarium is a facility that has rodents for testing drugs before they go into people. And I think this is something that all drugs before they go into people have to go through this animal testing stage. Right. And so it's something that we had really thought about, because this becomes, we can, make drug discovery much more rapid, but then you kind of hit this, like the next bottleneck after you do hit identification, validate your lead, then you run into this kind of bottleneck of animal testing. And so we had the opportunity to bring on a fantastic team at a vivarium in the Bay Area. And so that's the first remote acquisition that we made. And then that's allowed us to kind of control the pace and quality of the animal testing that our compounds go through. So that was a really important acquisition of kind of like moving from the in vitro or the laboratory testing into this animal testing, which is part of, unfortunately, what every drug has to go through before it goes into people. We also have our computational chemistry team. The founding member of that team is actually in Boston. Okay. And that was more of a case where we tried really, really hard to get the talent that we wanted here to Salt Lake City. And in every other case, we have worked hard and we have actually been able to bring the talent here to Salt Lake City. If it didn't already exist here, about 40% of our company, we relocated to Utah to work at Recursion. And so we've been very successful doing that. In this case, we just simply could not get Jorge here. And so, for commitments, that he has back in Boston. And so we also have him there. And we have to be creative about how we think about talent. He comes and visits us 1 week every month. We have some team go and visit him, which is a little bit of an opportunity to kind of maybe get out of the office and kind of like think and interact in a different place. And
Boston is not a bad place to interact if you're doing tech.
Yes, not a bad environment, actually. It's probably not a bad thing for our team to get out there every once in a while, right? And so I think those things have worked really well. We try, with our facility, the vivarium in the Milpitas area. One thing we just think about is like, it's really hard to work in a remote facility, to kind of be disconnected from headquarters. And so, and we're constantly learning, but we make sure, for example, that, we have an all hands with everybody here in Salt Lake every week, which we try to keep it fun and keep people updated on what's going on and hear what people are doing. And so we kind of find ways to make sure that they're, always zoomed into that meeting, that we can, sometimes we have meetings where we make sure that we can see them, which is a little bit technically hard in our facility, because we have, 150 people on this side and only about a dozen people on that side. Right. But, we just try to think about ways, how can we include them in, our holiday party, to make them feel like they're part of the company.
I can imagine that you've got a lot to offer people, though. I read you have something like a 70-foot climbing wall in your new facility. I would work for you guys just for the climbing wall.
I know, it's funny. So we're located in actually downtown Salt Lake City in a mall that had become was a new mall built, so this mall had become kind of partially abandoned, and now it's being reimagined into kind of a work, live, entertain hub. It's a fun place to work. But we took the former sporting goods store in the mall, and we put laboratories in, we put desks in, and there's a 70-foot climbing wall, which, I mean, to be totally honest, we could not afford to take out, even if we wanted to. It probably would not have been a good use of our funds, which is fantastic because it's actually become this centerpiece for the space. People climb on it every day, and when I go out into the world and I'm talking about Recursion, every once in a while I'll be like, oh, that's the company with the climbing wall, and so I'm like, well, yes, we have a climbing wall, but we also do drug discovery using cutting edge technology. But yes, and we have a climbing wall.
That's amusing. Well, the things you get known for can't hurt to get known for offering your employees, good quality of life.
It's a good visual. We had one of my favorite days this year was we have a kids' day where everybody's families are invited on site for the day, and we had a game where the parents climbed the climbing wall, and we gave the kids Nerf guns, and they got to shoot Nerf bullets at their parents while they're climbing the wall, and it was so much fun.
Yeah, I remember back in the day when I worked in sort of synthetic biology in the Bay Area. This was almost a decade ago. I used to puddle hop from Oakland to Salt Lake to go climbing in Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons because, including the airport transfers, it was faster than driving up to Tahoe or Yosemite on the weekend and a lot less crowded.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Salt Lake is just this really underappreciated gem. The airport here is amazing, and we have a transit stop right outside of our building, so I can walk out. I can be at the airport in the terminal in 12 minutes. And be in San Francisco in an hour and 10 minutes, flight. Yeah. So and the outdoor recreation here is absolutely incredible. I am actually originally from Colorado, so I was born and raised in Colorado. So is my husband, and so we love the mountains. That's been a natural fit for us. We always thought Colorado was better than anything because that's what happens when you grow up in Colorado. You think that, but here we're so close to the mountains. It's incredible. I live in Salt Lake City. I have a short commute to work, and I can be on the chairlift in Park City in 30 minutes. It's just really amazing.
Hard to argue with that.
Yeah. Definitely for the outdoor crowd. It's kind of a no-brainer in my mind.
Closing thoughts, if there's anything in particular you'd like to plug or promote or just leave the listeners with about Recursion. I guess my last question, which you can either answer or ignore, is what's the next thing that we should all look out for? What do you think is going to be the sort of the next milestone that you're able to kind of forecast or predict for?
Yeah, so I'm going to give a little bit of a longer term answer. I don't love speaking to kind of shorter term milestones and feel ready to give them out. But for me, what's important about Recursion and honestly even other companies, in this AI for drug discovery, the milestones that I'm really excited about is when do these medicines actually start impacting people, right? And that starts out in clinical trials, and eventually it's a long path to get these things all the way to market. But I think right now the AI for drug discovery industry is very young, and there's a lot of, and like anything young, there's just kind of a little bit of chaos trying to figure out what the best approaches are, where the best bets are, and it's really exciting to be a leader in that industry. And so I think what you should look forward to from Recursion, as well as what we should look forward to any company in this space, is how is all of this fantastic use of technology actually translating into medicines that are impacting people, right? And I think and I just wanted to end with that because I think it's really easy to get super excited about sexiness of the technology because it is so sexy and it's so exciting, and we're just able to do things today that we couldn't do 5 years ago, and that's really exciting. And so we should continue to invest in that. We grand ambition to create this map of biology, which is exciting, and we are going to do it. I absolutely believe in that mission of Recursion. But it's really important, looking forward for the next few years, what's important to show that while we're creating that map of biology, that's actually translating into meaningful products for people. And so I think that's what we will focus on in terms of what's important about what we're generating is how those medicines actually translate into people. And I just encourage all of us in the entire industry to make sure that that's what we're focused on.
I think that's a perfect answer. It is ultimately about the patients, not the technology, but Lord knows the technology is going to help us get there.
Absolutely. I love the technology. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes I think it's easy to talk so much about the technology that we forget a little bit what problem we're solving.
Well, I'm looking for great things. I'm glad to have gotten to know some of the folks on your team through the Alliance for AI in Healthcare and other venues, and I hope we get to stay in touch. Tina, thank you very much for joining us today.
It was an absolute pleasure, Rafael. Thank you.
This has been episode 16 of Talking Precision Medicine. Please share it with your colleagues, leave a comment or review, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks for joining the conversation.